rise and shine.
To the show, and we're moving on to our last and final segment. Now, if you are an enthusiast of history, this is one of those areas that you would like to perceive or pay attention, more attention. The Social Equality Party, to mark the 80th anniversary of the Fourth International, founded by the Leon Trotsky, co-leader, and Lenin of Russia, the October Revolution, and the 50th anniversary of the Socialist Equality Party, has invited a speaker to join us to discuss on the lessons of the history and the struggle for socialism today. Now, this gentleman who has joined has come from a wealth of experience, playing a leading role in the international socialist movement for 4 decades. He's an internationally acclaimed authority on the history of the world socialist movement, and he's well known for his publications being The Heritage We Defend, in the defense of Leon Trotsky and the Russian Revolution, and much, much more. He is the chairman of the International Editorial Board of the World Socialist Web Site. Mr. David North is with us in the studio following the meetings and discussions that were held in Peradeniya and Kandy as well. Thanks a lot for making the time here.
Thank you for inviting me.
National Channel. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you.
How has been the visit so far, quickly for you?
Well, it's been extremely interesting. We've had now 2 meetings. I was invited to give 2 lectures, one in Peradeniya University in Kandy and yesterday in Colombo. And they were extremely well attended, and immense interest, enthusiasm among those who attended. So it was very enjoyable to give these lectures.
So struggle of socialism today, and looking at how it was back in the day, celebrating the 80th anniversary. How do you see this whole evolution in the period of time?
Well, it's obviously been very complicated. Trotsky founded the Fourth International in 1938. And he did so as the culmination of the struggle he had waged against the degeneration of the Soviet Union under Stalin and the betrayal of the basic principles of Marxist internationalism by the Soviet Stalinist bureaucracy. Among his basic conceptions was that Stalin was the gravedigger of the revolution, and that the bureaucracy would lead ultimately to the destruction of the Soviet Union itself. This was a minority position. He fought for that under conditions of immense repression. He himself was ultimately murdered by the bureaucracy. And he said at the time, when he founded the Fourth International, that the basic problem of mankind was the crisis of revolutionary leadership in the working class. And that was subsequently confirmed in the fate of the socialist movement, despite the fact, and even in this country, there were massive socialist movements. These were ultimately defeated as a consequence of the abandonment of the principles of revolutionary internationalism for which Lenin and Trotsky had fought. Now today we're in a period which in many ways resembles that of the 1930s. 1938 was a period of rising fascism, the imminent threat of war, authoritarianism, economic crisis. And I think, while of course there are many things which have changed in the world, if we look at the situation, we are certainly in the midst of a global economic crisis expressed in deteriorating living standards for masses of working people. We face a intensification, escalation of international geopolitical conflicts which carry with them the danger of war. And we are seeing all over the world the emergence of extreme right-wing movements, Trump coming to power in the United States, the revival of neo-Nazi movements even in Germany. There's a great deal of discussion about the resurgence of authoritarianism, but the basic cause of it lies in the crisis of the capitalist system, the staggering growth of social inequality, and the failure of all the old organizations which claim to speak in the interests of the working class to advance a genuine socialist program. So I was invited here, actually, to speak on the lessons of history. What does history tell us in such a period? What can we learn from the past? There are many who say, well, why bother? Politics is purely pragmatic. But our view is that in order to conduct politics seriously, in order to develop the fight for socialism, you have to work off the lessons of history. And while we see all over the world a tremendous resurgence, particularly among the youth, in socialism, they are deprived, for many reasons, of a basic knowledge of the historical experiences of the last century, which are so important, even in this country. I mean, you had a powerful socialist movement, And yet here, like in so many countries, there has been the dominance of market, liberal economic policies which have had devastating consequences. So there is a resurgence of socialism, and the purpose of my lectures was to review some of the great historical experiences, and on that basis lay the foundations for a rebuilding of the international socialist movement, of which the International Committee of the Fourth International is the representative.
Okay. And Mr. North, also there are the reports saying that especially in the US and the UK, that some of these trade unions have lost their voices. They're also coming down in their voices, and they can't voice properly when it comes to whatever they want to gain, right, in their lives. So what do you think is, when talking about political traps, especially in those countries, what's your thoughts and views on that?
Well, I think to put it in a somewhat broader sense, I think all the organizations of the working class that emerged in the 20th century, the trade unions, the various socialist parties, in one way or another, they all worked within the framework of a national economic policy. We live in a global society, in a global economy, and the trade unions, which seek or sought at an earlier period, it's not even true today, but even at a time when they sought to make reforms within the framework of the national state, that has long since been superseded. You cannot fight for the interests of the working class unless you have a global strategy. How will you unite workers all over the world in an internationally integrated economy? And so the basic political foundation for the Fourth International is precisely that it brings to the working class an international strategy. The fight for socialism is not national, it's international. There's no national path. The national path leads inexorably to right-wing politics, trade wars, trying to line workers up behind their own ruling elites, and that is the path to war. So today the alternative is either we have an international socialist policy to unite the working class, or we have the capitalist policy of the struggle between nation states and war.
Okay. And the reason why you say that now this working class, they're deviating from their original leaders to different other new upcoming leaders. So what could be the reason behind that? Is it the unawareness or is it something else?
Well, there's always, ultimately, as Marxists, we always are concerned with what are the objective causes. You can concentrate on personalities, you can say this person is bad or that person is bad, but the real issues in the end are to be found in class interests, in the imperatives of economic organization. In one period, the ruling elites may bring forward more progressive figures. It may be a period of social reform, largely because they fear an upsurge of the working class. But in a period of economic crisis, where capitalism has no progressive alternatives to present, they dredge up figures like Trump. They dredge up neo-Nazi movements. I mean, this is a lesson we have from the historical experience of the last century. Okay. And so this time, we can't have a repeat of that experience because the consequences are catastrophic. World war today is world war with nuclear weapons. And if there's going to be a fight against war, it will require the unification of workers all over the world.
That's true.
Your publication on the unfinished 20th century, it seems like everything is finished today to me, bringing on the personal facts, but a country like China, where they going on helping, investing, or supporting the underdeveloped countries when it comes to loans, and then you find the loans to be traps as well in some sort. If you bring it to a circle, it looks like China is like an imperialist state. How do you see this?
Well, I think this is one of the reasons, that very question is one of the reasons why issues of history are so important. I don't think one can really understand the conditions in China today unless you place it within the framework of the long history of the socialist movement in China, the contradictions of the Chinese Revolution. As a matter of fact, the question of the strategy of the Chinese Revolution was a major issue in the development of the Fourth International. Stalin's theory of the bloc of four classes, socialism in one country, led to a profound disorientation of the Chinese Communist Party, a series of catastrophic defeats the reorientation to the peasantry. But to make a long story short, the turn of the Maoist regime to capitalist economics undoubtedly, under certain conditions, produced immense economic development, but now it's confronting the same basic historical problems which confronted the Chinese masses 80, 90 years ago. How will it deal with the reality of imperialism? I think one should avoid trying to summarize a very complex historical experience in simple phrases. Obviously, China is trying to extend its global influence, but that path leads it into inexorably into conflict with the United States, which is not prepared to accept China's rise. China, I understand, has just made a very large loan to Sri Lanka. I'm sure that angers the United States. A country such as Sri Lanka is caught in the maelstrom of these competing geopolitical interests. And that, I think, underscores the fact that there is no good progressive framework within which these problems can be solved on a capitalist basis. And as you indicate, with every loan comes conditions, no matter who gives them. And no country that is operating on a capitalist basis is operating for altruistic reasons. The Chinese ruling elite has nothing to do with Marxism or socialism any longer. But there remains, I think we have to understand that the problems of China are a very sharp expression of problems which exist on a world scale. Either for the Chinese masses, in the end, the road of capitalist development cannot solve its historical problems. And so I think we will have to see, and we will see, a resurgence in China of socialism, and I think the Trotskyist movement is going to play a major role in that development.
And also, Mr. North, speaking about the backward countries, now we have a number of backward countries when it comes to transnational programs, and also you mentioned about, I'm stating that your statement on the Leon Trotsky's 1938 document titled Death, Agony of Capitalism and the Tasks of the Fourth International still being valid today, and also about how that program is relevant to backward countries. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the basic conception which Trotsky advanced in relationship to countries with a belated capitalist development. We want to use the term backward is not intended as a culture. It's a question of what was the history of the development of capitalism. But countries which were either escaping from a colonial or neo-colonial relationship with imperialism. Trotsky said that that fight could not be led by the national bourgeoisie because it is tied to imperialist interests, to world capitalist interests, and the only genuine revolutionary force that can direct the fight against imperialism and to free the underdeveloped countries from the grip of the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, to use the terms of today, would be the working class. The working class is not tied to international capital, and it must be part of a global struggle to reorganize the world economy on an equitable, democratic, scientifically planned basis. So that fundamental conception of the theory of permanent revolution was vindicated again and again. I mean, many countries throughout Africa, throughout Asia, claimed that they had found a national path of development, but they're all today in the same crisis, dependent upon foreign loans, dependent upon the provision of low-cost labor. So certainly it is not a path for development. The same fundamental question which Trotsky raised in the 20th century, of the permanent revolution, that the working class must be the leader of the democratic and socialist struggle, remains true today.
The Socialist Equality Party has a youth movement where the International Youth and Students for Social Equality, the program for youth party is advancing to the youth against education, on privatization, welfare cuts, unemployment. How do you see the progress going? Because it's like a buzz talk here.
It's very interesting all over the world. I'm sure you've seen it. And in the United States, it's very striking because there's no country where there has been so much propaganda against socialism as in America. And yet, the experience of youth, of this new generation, with the realities of capitalism, the absence of opportunities, the absence of decent jobs, the fact, speaking of America, that youth go to school and leave college with massive debts, They don't have the resources to start a family. All of these things, and the perpetual violence of our society, the endless wars which are being waged, have created a profound alienation among youth toward the existing system, capitalism, which is again becoming a dirty word in the United States and many other countries. And there's an interest in socialism. That's very progressive and healthy. The problem is the knowledge of what socialism is, of its history, still remains very limited, and that requires extensive education, and the International Youth and Students for Social Equality is conducting that fight. It's building its movement all over the world. It's educating young people in the principles of socialist internationalism. It's acquainting them with the history of the struggle against Stalinism. Of course, the question which many young people have is they want socialism, but they don't want dictatorship. They don't want a regime like Stalin's regime. And so when they learn that there was a fight against the crimes of Stalinism, that there was a fight for genuine socialist democracy and internationalism, that's very attractive. And that is a fight that the IYSSE is carrying out in Sri Lanka and throughout the world. We're very, very proud of the fact that our movement is an international movement which unifies people regardless of nationality, ethnic background, religious background, gender preferences. These are all not the major issues. The major issues today are the relationship of people to the world economy, their commonality as working people, and the necessity to unite them for progress and for socialism.
I want to quickly ask, your visit in Colombo and Peradeniya, how was the meetings? What was the response from our candidates? What did they say?
Well, it was a
How did they
tremendous
question
response.
you?
I mean, anyone who, as a Trotskyist, anyone who is familiar with the Trotskyist movement knows that there was a great history of Trotskyism, and I've been very proud to work closely for many, many decades with the Socialist Equality Party, previously the Revolutionary Communist League here in Sri Lanka. I've enjoyed the comradeship of Comrade Vijay Dias, the General Secretary of the SEP here in Sri Lanka, who is an internationally renowned figure. We all know that our party waged a fight for the unity of Sinhala and Tamil people during the terrible civil war, which caused so much suffering in this country. And so this principles of internationalism are one which have been applied by our comrades here in Sri Lanka, and so I was very honored that they would invite me to speak on this important anniversary. And it was also the 50th anniversary of their founding, the RCL. Now the SEP was founded in 1968.
All right. And so when it comes to Sri Lanka, Mr. Noth, now you've been to the middle of the country as when you conducted a number of seminars as well. And what do you think Sri Lanka has to improve in when it comes to socialism, when it comes to social reforms? What do you think Sri Lanka lacks and it requires?
I think Sri Lanka, first of all, you have an absolutely gorgeous country. I was very, very happy that I finally had some time to do some photography, which I was kind enough to find a few hours to do. It's a gorgeous country. And a country with an immense political culture and history. But like all the countries, small country, country with a colonial past, oppressed by imperialism, it has inadequate resources. It needs the resources of the world economy without having to provide, to use the term, cheap labor, super exploitation, free trade zones. I mean, all of these are means which result in the oppression of the people of this country. And so all the things which are required can only be obtained through the reorganization of the world economy. I wish there were a more simple answer, because this, of course, is a daunting task. But even if you look at India, which is so much larger, they face similar problems. And so the program of socialist internationalism is the only viable response to the great problems we face. It is really, to use the old phrase, workers of the world unite and build the party of World Socialist Revolution. That's what is required. There's not In history, great historical questions don't have simple answers. And they're complicated answers and difficult answers. And but we have a vast experience behind us, and now we're in a new century. We already know it's not the end of history. We're very much in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But this time we have to get it right and draw on the lessons of the past and build a movement that can bring the working class to power and create a new world.
All right.
Thank you very much, David North. Thank you for joining us on the
Thank you for
show. We really learned a lot about the revolution and its changes and the impacts that's been taking place. He was the chairman of the International Editorial Board of the World Socialist Web Site. We'd love to have you back again.
Oh,
so
I'd love to
thank you
come.
very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.